Let's face the facts. Emerald Fennell didn't make Wuthering Heights for you. Now, I get it. That might piss some people off given the history, nature, and importance of Emily Bronte's seminal work, and especially what that work means to so many people. But it's precisely because it means so much to so many different people who want so many different things out of an adaptation that Emerald Fennell could really only make this movie with one person in mind. Regardless of what you think of her, and everyone out there I'm sure has like 1,000,001 opinions about her as a filmmaker, a person, whatever, she is undoubtedly a provocateur who seeks to challenge her audiences, making absolutely no attempt to make anything conventional or comfortable for anyone else. In a world where female filmmakers are still fighting for equality and opportunities, it's amazing to see someone like Fennell who refuses to play it safe. She's not averse to exploring the intersection of sex and psychology through the female lens, and while you could argue it's done in a populist way, or it doesn't go as far as you'd like, I don't think that makes it any less interesting or effective. She's willing to go places and do things without the fear of embarrassment, and in an age where culture is pumping the brakes on creativity, despite what you may think of her work, you have to admire that fearlessness. Basically, when it comes down to it, Emerald Fennell is not gonna wither everyone's heights. I don't even know if that made sense. I mean, it made sense in my head when I said it the first time in the, you get what I'm trying to say here. To say that no one has really gotten a Wuthering Heights adaptation right is kind of an understatement. I mean, sure, yeah, there's some that are more beloved than others, but none of them have really just like hit the mark. So many attempts have failed to capture all aspects of this sprawling tale, unable to please those who have love for the original text and deem it sacred, and finding a way to make it appealing and digestible to a modern audience. With this history, it's absolutely understandable that many deem Wuthering Heights to be truly unadaptable. It's a love story, it's a ghost story, straddling the line between reality and supernatural. It's a story drenched in class, commentary, trauma, and romance. It's a story that transcends generations, becoming huge and epic, all the while focusing on small, intimate details, small moments that make up relationships this intense and toxic. The morality of its central characters is so complex in order to carry the immense weight of all these themes and threads, but then you face the issue of taking people who commit awful acts or have deeply unlikable traits and molding them into protagonists that an audience can engage with and care about. Fennell described Bronte's book as a kind of Rorschach test as opposed to a straightforward conventional novel, as everyone has their own view on the text, their own thoughts and feelings and interpretations that become tangled up in it. The point in your life where you read the book, the experiences you've had up to that point, will inform your own unique perspective. The natural result of that, especially with the type of filmmaker Fennell is and the discourse her films inspire, is that you're never going to please everyone. And you know what? That's okay. So many books these days are adapted to the screen within a few years of their initial publication, even less. Like, honestly, last year we had Sunrise on the Reaping come out, and this year we're now getting the movie. That's the era we're kind of living in right now, where a book is written and the movie's not far behind it. And sure, some of these books may go on to become classics and their adaptations may too, but the rush to convert those pages to the big screen and capitalize on an author's success means so many of these books don't get the time to breathe and develop this reverence naturally. So of course, when books that have been afforded that much courtesy get adapted, they garner much stronger and much more emotional reactions, for better or worse. It's been over 100 years, if you can believe it, since Wuthering Heights first debuted on the silver screen, and after countless attempts, none have been crowned the definitive version by its hordes of adoring fans. Naturally, this, paired with Fennell's divisiveness as a filmmaker, had her up against the ropes from the get-go. Fans were ready to jump onto any discrepancies between her version and the source material. However, it's strange that people are singling her out. Many filmmakers have taken similarly revered stories and forgone the direct comparisons by taking the loose framework and transplanting it onto a new setting and time period. Films like Clueless, A Knight's Tale, even West Side Story, if you really want to go there, found huge success in purposefully separating themselves from their inspirations and using a modern framework to introduce a new audience to classics they may not be immediately called to explore. That's why it's so interesting to see Fennell decide to craft a version of Wuthering Heights that is distinctly modern and contemporary in its themes and vibes, but still maintains its original period setting. It allows Fennell to pull elements from the book that particularly resonated with her and deliver it to a modern audience, particularly teens and young adults, by giving them a certain suspension of disbelief, an almost fantasy framework to process these ideas. If this was an adaptation set in modern day, wrapped in a more conventional period romantic drama, I feel like it would likely get lost in the shuffle. People wouldn't be talking about it as much. They wouldn't be as interested in it. And I think sliding into the slipstream of recent period successes like Bridgerton, which I'm not really comparing this to, but I mean, there's no denying that it takes a page out of the Bridgerton handbook, gives it a huge boost in how easily people will engage with it. Fennell has stated in interviews that her experience with the book dates back to when she was a teenager herself, reading it as a 14-year-old as part of the school curriculum in the UK, and talks of the profound impact it had on her in her formative years. This is what Fennell is adapting in this version. Not the original text, but the feelings and memories she has of it, which is what makes it truly unique. It's also clear that the movies she was watching when she read this book have kind of become intertwined in that memory, in that feeling that she felt reading Wuthering Heights, with her specifically referencing films like James Cameron's Titanic and Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet as pivotal films from her adolescence. Luhrmann's work is of particular interest here because it's clear that maximalist approach of throwing everything at a film, abandoning any attempts at quiet subtlety, and going all in on spectacle, bombast, and most importantly, pure, unbridled emotion was of the utmost importance to Fennell. When adapting a film based primarily on the feeling and passion it evoked in you, rather than a straight-up adaptation, it feels only natural for Fennell to adopt this same boldness, brashness, to sucker punch the viewer in the same way these books and films sucker punch us as young adults, latching themselves onto our very sense of being, informing our tastes and worldview at a time where we're exploring arts in the same way we're exploring ourselves. That's not entirely inaccurate. The film is a translation of her experiences reading the book, not a direct interpretation of it. Even the film's title, stylized with quotation marks, is telling you that what you're watching isn't the true Wuthering Heights, but just something very closely inspired by it, almost in the same vein as Kate Bush's famous namesake song. You could even go as far as to label it fanfiction, which I can't believe I'm gonna go there, but I'm just going to do it. It's the thing that makes the most sense in my head, so let's roll with it. For example, 50 Shades of Grey was written in response to Twilight, and while, yeah, it's not a particularly good series or book, it's terrible, but it became a phenomenon because people related to E.L. James's emotional response. It has a self-awareness, lovingly taking the piss out of the self-seriousness of Twilight and all of its pent-up angst. I think the same is true here, but I mean, in a much more complex and elegant sense. I'm not comparing Emerald Fennell's version of Wuthering Heights to 50 Shades of Grey, although I'm sure you'll see many people do that. I disagree, but I just, roll with me here. This remixed interpretation from Fennell is a response and reflection conversing with her younger self. She's honoring the grand emotions and tragic romance that impacted her as a teenager, but she's able to take a step back and reckon with the toxicity of it all as an adult, and perhaps why we're drawn to things that aren't great for us. The tragedy of Catherine and Heathcliff can really help us understand our own faults in a relationship, what we settle for because it's proper, what we subsequently lust over because we've denied our very nature, something we embrace when we're younger and full of hormones, but then shut out over time. There's a crushing inevitability to the doomed nature of their romance, how nothing can change the path they are on. It's heavily foreshadowed throughout the film, possibly a little ham-fistedly at times, but it's because it's so obvious as soon as we begin to understand these characters a little deeper that their intense connection with each other can never make them compatible in the environment they live in. It's evident that Fennell sees Catherine as her way into the story, the character she not necessarily empathizes with or relates to the most, but the character she understands, a character from her world. She sees Catherine as cruel and torturous, a recreational sadist who gleefully torments everyone around her, a product of the world she's been born into. The opening depicts what initially sounds like sex, only to reveal itself to be a man strangling on the noose, kickstarting a chain of reaction of people, more or less, getting off to the pain this man is enduring. Even the close-up shots of the hanging man's erection amidst all of this couldn't be more obvious as to what Fennell set her sights on with this reimagining. It's also an incredibly effective way of putting us in the mind, in the headspace of Catherine immediately as the film begins. From here, we see her playing with the puppets. She's killing rats in a barrel. Pain and pleasure are experienced in an impish, childlike manner, and this continues into her adult life, whether she's fully cognizant of it or not. I think one of my biggest issues with the film is that I wanted more from them as kids, or at least as young adults, or something, growing in their feelings for one another. Those years are pivotal in the development of this pairing, and more time spent there would have allowed for a deeper and more gradual understanding of their relationship. The film eventually gets me there via the sheer emotional grandeur of it all, but there's no denying it's a bit light on depth towards the beginning, even a little bit in the middle. That's not to say the film is shallow. It's not shallow at all, but I want to feel that irresistible magnetic pull between these two doomed lovers and all that intense yearning. You do eventually get all that yearning. I mean, trust me, there's enough yearning in here to fill a lifetime, but it could have made for a more effective slow build if that push and pull of their incompatibility and their undying love for one another was present throughout the whole film. That being said, maybe that's Fennell making a point, that it wasn't the personalities they were born with that made them unsuited to each other, but the ideals forced upon them that became self-fulfilling prophecies from the people around them and the hierarchical class structure they find themselves trapped in at the house. Another key element in Catherine's characterization is her complex relationship with her father. He's abusive, a drunk, a gambler, a manipulator, yet he brings home Heathcliff, who is a source of much pleasure for Catherine. So much of who Catherine is comes from behaviors inherited and ingrained in her from her father, and no matter how much she tries to escape him and separate herself from his influence and actions, they're more alike than she'd care to admit. And there's an inherent contradiction in both, in that they consistently see themselves as kind rulers and charitable owners, convincing themselves they're doing great deeds using their power and status for good, but completely missing the point that this kind of ownership over other people is abhorrent by its very nature. A key element to her character that the book really leans into is how Catherine very intentionally wants the best of both worlds without any concern for anyone else. She thrives on the pleasures of high society, but she still wants Heathcliff, who is an inherent inverse of that lifestyle. Perhaps that's exactly what informs why Fennell naturally lent into Catherine as a character, as it sort of lines up with her career as a filmmaker so far, and how she likes to explore stories of other classes or marginalized characters and how they move through a world more closely aligned with her own experiences in upper class circles, which she does too, as we've seen, pretty mixed results. In this story, Heathcliff takes on the role of the outsider thrust into this world, and it makes for a fascinating comparison between him and Cathy in that they have such contrasting upbringings in the same household and under the same father, even though he's an adopted father in Heathcliff's case. From the moment he arrives at the house, he is degraded and treated as a secondary class to even the other members of the staff at Wuthering Heights, even being labeled as Catherine's new pet, a new doll, a new plaything for her to control. One of the primary differences between their upbringings is the level of physical abuse each of them receive at the hands of Mr. Earnshaw. The scars on Heathcliff's back from the many years of abuse at the hands of her father exist as a reminder of the pain he endured in his attempts to shield Catherine from the brutality of her father. His submission to her from the moment he arrives at the house as a child consumes him, as she's likely the first person to show him anything close to kindness and attention. Heathcliff and Cathy are products of their upbringing, and that upbringing turns them into terrible, selfish people. That's why the story is called Wuthering Heights and not Catherine and Heathcliff or whatever. It's literally about how their experience in that house fundamentally shaped them as people and informed the trajectory of their doomed love. It isn't just a setting. I mean, half the story doesn't even take place there. It's closer to being a character, because the house and their experiences within it ultimately become their downfall. One thing Fennell does that I do find interesting is how she takes the idea of Heathcliff being this monstrous person and interprets it as someone putting on an act to mask his longing for Catherine. His attempt at torturing her is to create the very persona she ascribes to him and adopt it when it can benefit him, and as it consumes his entire life, it means that his life in its entirety becomes a performance, and that side of him fuels cruelty back at Catherine, and continues this cycle of toxicity and abuse. Instead of him being outwardly mean to Isabella, he's a bit more manipulative, exploiting her kinks, indulging her sexual fantasies and desires, but only as a means to get back at Catherine. He's fully manipulating her, taking advantage of her. He's just not doing it in a way that's overt, and it echoes the way he was used and abused, degraded and dismissed as a child by Catherine's father. Isabella still has her agency in the matter. She agrees to do these things, to write the letters for Heathcliff, and in return, he'll treat her nice, but mostly out of pleasure and a shared disdain for the cruelty inflicted upon them by Catherine. This is Fennell fully imagining Heathcliff's actions as an exaggeration or a lie, and then she interrogates why that is. It's almost as if Heathcliff is degrading himself by not only being in that relationship, but indulging Isabella's fantasies, and Fennell very clearly calls that out. For Heathcliff, torture is a requirement of love because of his upbringing. He must endure some sort of pain before he receives pleasure. Similarly to how Fennell interprets the unreliable narrator element of Bronte's original work, the ghost story element of the original text is removed and reinterpreted in a less literal way, being funneled through the character of Heathcliff rather than Catherine. This feels like a natural progression for this part of the story in this particular version. Firstly, as it's clear this isn't really the kind of story Fennell has any interest in telling, so crowbarring it in would do the film a huge disservice. And secondly, as Fennell is channeling a lot of this story through Catherine, differing from the book that focuses more on Heathcliff's perspective via the framing device, his return in the film is treated almost as a supernatural occurrence, often appearing seemingly from nowhere, in slightly strange circumstances, out of the bushes, through the windows, in mist. He's even shot like a phantom from the past in this mysterious way, leaving the events from the interim deliberately vague and undefined so as to add to the enigma. This defines his role in the second half of the story as a specter at the feast for Catherine, a reminder to her of a life lost, the consequence of her choice to prioritize her status over her true love that led her to be trapped in a hellish situation while the man she dreamt of being with lives a few miles away across the moors. Though alive and well, he actively haunts her. One thing you could say is that the extensive focus and attention Fennell pours into Catherine does potentially do a disservice to Heathcliff's development. I see what Fennell is trying to do by taking a remarkably complex character and swap that complexity for a more general mysticism, going on to use that mystery to reflect the attitudes of those viewing him and give him an altered role in the story. But that sadly leads to him being a little oversimplified. I don't mind Heathcliff having more enigmatic origins, which we'll dive into a bit later on, as it's in line with how Fennell is writing Catherine and using her to critique the I can fix him mentality people hold towards alluring, mysterious, and ultimately dangerous people. But I do think you have to do a lot of inferring when it comes to him and what fuels his heinous actions as the film progresses. I would argue the biggest issue with his dip into intense cruelty later in the film, particularly directed toward Isabella, is that it almost comes out of nowhere. I think you can assume a lot based on the environment he grew up in and how he was treated, and that he gets off on revenge and such, inflicting that pain back onto someone else. But similarly to Saltburn, where Oliver's actions feel a bit asymmetric to the cruelty thrown at him by Felix and his family, Heathcliff's cruelty here isn't really teed up as much. It rides a lot on that self-fulfilling prophecy aspect, him becoming what he's always told he is, but the gradual nature of that decline isn't there on screen. The biggest source of controversy prior to the film's release has been the casting of Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff, and how it wasn't necessarily bucking the trend of casting a white person in the role. The frustration comes from a lack of real clarity around the character's race and origins. The original text refers to a young Heathcliff as a dark-skinned gypsy, and infers multiple times subsequently that he may be a person of color. Adding to this, Catherine's father clarifying that he found Heathcliff in Liverpool lends credence to this line of thoughts, as it was one of Britain's busiest slave ports at the time. On the other hand, this could lean towards the theory that Bronte intended Heathcliff to be Irish, with many Irish immigrants crossing to Liverpool at the start of the famine. And then later on in the film, when he comes back and he's all polished and everything, and he's a gentleman now. I mean, he's referred to as being white, and so there's a lot of ambiguity here. Fennell's decision to cast Elordi may seem dismissive of progressive and diverse interpretations of the book that have grown as a modern lens has been cast upon it, but it's a deeply personal interpretation to her, and it's important to note that it isn't her responsibility to answer that question. She stated herself that one of the reasons Elordi was cast in the first place is due to him having an uncanny resemblance to the illustration of Heathcliff from the first copy of Wuthering Heights she owned. And while that may feel surface level, I get it, it goes deeper and becomes entwined with the director's own identity. To enforce a definitive answer on the text and to further apply this to any adaptation only seeks to diminish one of its key strengths, its potential for infinite interpretations from its audience. By adapting the text in this way, Fennell isn't limiting the text or denying further interpretations of the book, she's actively encouraging them. I think what Fennell actually does with the ambiguity of Heathcliff's origin and the way everyone in the story interprets it is fascinating, as it says more about everyone else in the story than it does about Heathcliff. He is abused, he's treated by Catherine as a project, he's viewed as a pet, showing how little they really think of him as a person from the moment he joins the family. It isn't his actions that lead to this treatment, it's his stature in society. And in a time when the Earnshaws are careening towards hard times and slipping down the social ladder, it brings them great pleasure to keep Heathcliff as a reminder that he and others like him are beneath them. When he comes back after his time away more gentlemanly, he's able to pass as someone worthy, more deserving of their attention. He's instantly more desirable to them, but he then shows the same disregard for those he deems to be below him in his elevated status, using them to reach his own selfish goals and continuing the same cycle. Perhaps it's a more salient idea if you make him a person of color who feels he has to become white in order to be accepted and get what he wants, only to realize he'll never be accepted by these people. It aids the larger commentary more effortlessly, sure, but to me, at least, given how torturous and uncomfortable the nature of that story is, by maintaining a layer of ambiguity around his origins, by treating him like a specter, Fennell manages to cut more directly at the idea that even whiteness doesn't shield you from prejudice. It's challenging the broad idea of social constructs, of classism, and what is or isn't deemed acceptable or desirable on the surface. And not to trivialize the issue at all, but when you take away an obvious out like racism, what does the nature of that prejudice look like? You can easily map that commentary onto how people treat people of color and how that, paired with irrational hatred for people of a different skin color or culture, is only worsened. To me at least, Fennell's interpretation is more of a distillation of the ideas in Bronte's work. The true racial commentary in this film comes from Nellie and Edgar, and so it's not even like she fully forgoes that. These are people of color in a world that forces them to present in a socially acceptable way, doing everything they can to fit in, and they're still treated with contempt and cruelty. Naturally, she's drawn to the part of the novel she does understand and can speak to, which is the upper-class posh mentality that unravels young women, pushing them to be cruel gods playing with the livelihoods of others less privileged than them. By applying modern values around racism to the text, you're doing a disservice to what the film is actually saying and how that's relevant to us today, as well as in the film's time period. Also, I mean, let's be real, how off-putting would it be for a white filmmaker from a distinctly upper-class background to depict a complex and complicated and pretty damn irredeemable person of color character like the book does, and not have it feel like it's stumbling into the uncomfortable territory of vilifying him? This feels like her using Wuthering Heights to talk about problems that are perpetuated by her own culture and speaking from a perspective she understands. There are many ways to interpret the messages of class and race in Wuthering Heights, and for Fennell to tackle cultural issues that are not her own would be disingenuous and problematic, so she tells the story through her own truth instead. And in the end, I mean, that's all a filmmaker can and should do. Wuthering Heights is probably the steamiest film we've had in a hot minute, at least like the steamiest mainstream film we've had in a hot minute. Fennell cautions through excruciating pain the dangers of denying yourself happiness, adventure, intimacy, and love to appease cultural attitudes lest we come undone. By rejecting your desires, you completely lose yourself. These people with their developing prudish attitudes will ruin and judge the freedom of others simply because it's not what they deem to be socially acceptable. The film mines the tension between what society tells you is appropriate and conversely, our true human desires, our human nature that may contradict those views and how that unravels a person. An element I find interesting is the fluidity of the roles of our two protagonists within their sexual relationship. Heathcliff presents as dominant, but is actually rather submissive. Catherine presents as submissive, but is actually rather dominant, and those roles twist, switch, and contort as they get older and they start to let that yearning really fuck with them. The confines of the outside world, the boxes that society places these two in, are destroyed when they're entwined in these moments of lust and longing. It places them both on a level, even playing field, a place of freedom, unleashing their true selves with each other and letting the pretense fall away as they drag each other into the depths of pleasure. It's interesting now to look back at Fennell's last outing, Saltburn, and the intense reaction to its fairly immature but honestly pretty mild sexual content, and how this almost acts as a response to that. Younger viewers, Gen Z in particular, has shown their hand to Fennell that they can't handle the slightest bit of unconventional titillation, so in return, she bakes that into the film, connecting the dots between passion and pain and an increasingly more brutal, sadistic world contrasted with this Puritan mentality. The passion, the yearning, the sexual tension and sexual release, it's real, it's natural, it's human. By allowing her experiences with her own audiences to inform her work, she sees that these people are, in a lot of cases, just pretty fucking uptight and is highlighting the need for everyone to release healthily and in intimate settings. In short, I mean, she's basically just telling everyone to chill the fuck out and get laid. And honestly, fair. Yeah, I agree. One thing Emerald Fennell certainly doesn't hold back on and excels at is style. The response to Fennell's career so far has given her a reputation as a filmmaker who prioritizes style over substance, and as mentioned earlier, that was one of my biggest issues with Saltburn. In Wuthering Heights, though, she drags this centuries-old story into the modern day via the cinematography and bakes the substance of the film into the style. And not just the cinematography, but like incredible production design, these dresses, these costumes, and then, yeah, Charlie XCX soundtrack as well. I mean, the film is quite literally dripping in aesthetic. The moody, gothic feel paired with this intense vibrance breathes new life into this period setting, which has so often felt bland. It's got such a visceral, tangible feel that's gorgeous while also pretty disgusting. I mean, it's so great to see a filmmaker really let loose and get away from making something aesthetically pleasing by the standards of modern audiences, and is happy to challenge those viewers. You can't make anything interesting unless you're willing and unafraid to make something difficult and unpalatable and get away from the idea of being embarrassed or ashamed. This eagerness from the entire production team to shake off the restraints of genre and the boundaries of typical movie making is so refreshing to see in an era of studio mandates and movies written by committee, and is particularly refreshing when it's being applied to an established IP adaptation. It feels weird calling Wuthering Heights IP, but I guess it is. It's this freedom that allows them to play with the standard conventions of period drama, smashing those traditions together with the contemporary to give us something wholly original and uncanny. Modern textiles, fabrics, and materials are forced into period designs, aiding the fever dream of it all. It's a film that uses nature as a parallel to its central themes. It warns of the perils of trying to contain nature and how dangerous it can be when it's left unbound. A prime representation of this is the two central locations of the film, the titular Wuthering Heights and its opposite in Thrushcross Grange. Fennell describes their approach to designing Wuthering Heights in that it was made as if nature, unconstrained, was invading it. It's wet, it's harsh, it's full of sharp rocks and muddy bogs and pig's blood, and gives you that visceral feeling of a lack of control over your surroundings, and that nature will always take its course no matter what you do. The walls of Kathy's skin acting as a prison to keep her separate from what feels natural to her. No different to the goldfish trapped in their bowls, the birds in their cages, and the garden stopped from growing any further by the walls of the house. Of course, any attempt to control or contain nature is sure to fail because it's inevitable. Both locations, though operating at different ends of the metaphor, bring you the same feeling of dread and unease because they both lead us to the same conclusion. Mother Nature was allowed to run free at Wuthering Heights, and it gradually eroded and decayed everything and everyone within it. Thrushcross Grange may have appeared to weather that storm for longer, but with the pressure building inside, the walls essentially sweating under the strain and the inhabitants slowly losing themselves and their sanity in the facade, it had to buckle eventually. As Catherine is clinging on to life, as nature bursts through the windows, the raging winds and rain pouring in to finally break the defenses down and claim her. To try and defy nature is to try and defy life, and therefore death itself, as you cannot have one without the other. Using the set design to convey this truly shows a growth in Fennell as a filmmaker in how she uses style to aid the substance rather than replace it, and is a testament to the creative team behind the camera that it works so goddamn well. She uses these tools to inform her characters too, in the way they interact with the physical world around them is key to understanding their place in this world. Wuthering Heights was designed to be too small for towering 6'5" Jacob Elordi, having him feel cramped in this small space that never truly fit for him. And the inverse feels true also for Margot Robbie's Catherine at Thrushcross Grange, as she appears much smaller than she actually is in these huge expansive rooms, as if there's no way she could ever grow to fit there. It's the same with their costumes too, especially in the latter half of the film, as they both seem so confined and uncomfortable in everything they wear, as if they're fitting into something that does not and cannot belong to them. Consequently, it's all the more gratifying during the sex scenes when the shackles of these costumes are thrown off and you feel that physical release from the actors, like they can breathe and move for the first time in forever. There's nothing inherently disgusting about these close-ups of food we see on screen, the raw egg and the kneading of the dough, and these are things many people in the audience are incredibly familiar with in their everyday life and are happy to consume for pleasure themselves, but the film is shooting them in a way that we don't often see. So much of what we see in the modern day is sanitized and made to look perfect for our pleasure, so being confronted with the true reality of it, whether it's the viscosity of the egg yolk or the squelching of the bread dough, can be tough to take. But within the context of already being challenged on your repressed beliefs of lust and sex, maybe Fennell is making a very valid point to the audience. If you can find something you love and regularly consume disgusting through a different lens, then maybe you could look at things you find disgusting differently and find something to love. All of these elements combine with the force of a hurricane to basically bash you over the head with everything Fennell is trying to convey. It can be pretty overwhelming, it can be titillating, it can be painful, it can be disgusting. You might not know how you feel watching it, but you probably felt something, and I think that's the most important thing here. Fennell's intention behind this adaptation was to create something torturous for those who have read the book, evoking Bronte's knack for cruelty, taking advantage of pre-established expectations and denying them the release that they so desperately need. On the other hand, those unfamiliar with the book are delivered a story of deep passion and desire, but one that is still likely at moments to make them feel uncomfortable and make them squirm a little bit. She's quite literally operating with pain and pleasure in mind for her respective audience, and you could argue that's the kind of sadistic troll that makes the film so off-putting, but in reality, I think it captures the spirit of the text nicely. Sure, it may not be as complex in its writing as perhaps some would like it to be, but if this serves as a launch point for people to then go on and further mine the original text, it's so refreshing to see a filmmaker take the bold move to release something into the world that she knows will likely bring her as much derision and anger as it will bring praise and plaudits. It brings us back to this idea of what Fennell's responsibilities are as a filmmaker. I can understand a frustration from devoted lovers of Bronte's book that they'll never receive their dream definitive version on-screen adaptation. But the harsh truth is that version can never exist because everyone's idea of Wuthering Heights is different. When a book bakes itself into the zeitgeist and lives on as long as this one has, the snowball effect of its timelessness and reverence means it will never stop being reimagined or reinterpreted. It is impossible to apply objectivity to Bronte's work, and doing so does it a huge disservice. The only person qualified to try would be Emily Brontë herself, but if she wanted that to be the case, it would be clear in the text and wouldn't require centuries of reevaluation and debate from intellectuals and scholars hailing from all walks of life. The inherent point of art is for it to be construed uniquely by its consumer, and no one has a right to apply absolutes to said arts, aside from, the artists themselves. And even then, there is death of the artist, right? So there's death of the author. Fennell lays her soul bare with all the subtlety of an atom bomb, and whether you love it, hate it, or feel ambivalent towards it, that demands a certain level of respect and admiration in a world so scared to look at itself in the mirror. If I was excited to see what Emerald Fennell did after Saltburn, then Wuthering Heights has got me pretty damn ecstatic for her next project.